Tim here from Youth Work Hacks. I'm here with Ali Campbell, who is an experienced youth worker, a youth work consultant, the creator of The Resource, which is a brilliant webpage if you've not been on it already, and a guy who's really passionate about intergenerational ministry. Thank you very much for joining us, Ali.
Thank you, mate. It's good to be here.
Yeah, how are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. I'm on my third coffee, so we should be okay.
It's 10:13. You're on your third coffee. That is impressive.
We'll have to have two before I do anything.
So IV it to the bed.
That's it. Yeah, no, I'm all right now.
I'm on fruit tea at the moment.
Oh, you're so healthy.
Yes, I'm all kinds of healthy. No, lovely. Ali's going to talk to us today about longevity in youth work. How do you stick around for the long haul? So let's jump right in there. How long have you been doing youth work for, Ali, and why have you stuck at it?
Okay, I've been doing youth work probably... I keep thinking it's a certain amount of time, and then years go past. So it's 34 years now. So coming up the summer, it'll be 34 years. Started when I was 18, so 52 in the summer.
Wow.
And I started out as a volunteer, so I was roped in by my then little Baptist church Sunday school superintendent. Roped me into things. Took me to the pub. Which was unusual for a Baptist church Sunday school superintendent. But then he bought me a couple of beers and asked if I would take over.
That's the right way to do it, isn't it? You buy the beer
he was
first.
buying me beer, and he was, like, yeah, great. If you're going to buy me beer, I'll do whatever you like. So, yeah, took over, not really knowing what I was doing. I'd already been involved a little bit as a volunteer. And then I did that for a decade at my small Baptist church. Other volunteers came and went. I had not a clue how to build or motivate a team at the time. Bearing in mind, all my team were older than me, but they didn't hang around for very long. So I felt like it was a bit of a slog for that decade. I did some training with Oasis. During that time, I also got involved with New Wine, primarily doing kids' work, which I loved. And then gradually felt a real sense of call increasing, I guess, through that decade, and then did some training with Oasis. Then went to work for a church in West London as their youth minister. Did that for 7.5 years, then moved to Sussex as the youth and children's advisor for the Diocese of Chichester. Did that for 9, and then started to develop the resource as I took redundancy from Chichester. Stayed where I was in Sussex for a while, and then moved up north. So I've been running the resource for 5 years, doing consultancy, support work, and I've come full circle. So I started out as a volunteer. I'm now back as a volunteer, working in my own church, serving both the kids' work and the youth work.
That's great. It's interesting that you've spent as much time in each of your jobs than most youth workers spend in any job altogether. You know, the average youth worker stays in contract for about 3 years and then quits and does something else. But you've stayed in each of your jobs for longer, in fact, 3 times longer than most youth workers last. So I guess the question here is, why do youth workers keep quitting? Why do they only last one contract? What are some of the reasons why youth workers don't stick around?
I guess I don't know that that's completely true.
Okay.
So you might recall I did some research last year that was basically looking at the terms and conditions for salaried workers. And I printed it out because I can't remember all my stats. But just thinking about time served, when asked how long they've been in their current role, and this was out of 630 people that answered my survey, 34% said they'd been in post for less than 2 years.
Oh, wow.
Rising to 53% for less than 3. Just 8% have been in their current role for 10 years or more. However, 24% have been in salaried ministry for longer than a decade. So
wow,
there is progression.
Great.
There are people staying in it for the long term. Is that consistent? It's hard to say because there is quite a high turnover.
Yeah.
So in terms of that kind of half have only been doing their current role for less than 3 years.
Yeah.
And I think something like 50% of our salaried work has been salaried ministry for less than 5 years. So half our workforce has only been in this for 5 years.
Okay, yeah.
That's salaried work.
Yeah.
So I guess in terms of the contract stuff and those things that that can be inhibitors to staying. One of the challenges is how churches fund ministry in the first place.
Yeah.
So if you have to raise money to employ a worker, is there a sustainable plan about what you're going to do to keep raising money? You know, are you expecting giving to go up in the church? That means you can then afford that worker without a fundraising campaign after 3 years. There's lots of churches, I think, that are excited about what's involved in having a youth worker, but don't necessarily put in place all that they need to ensure that work can continue. So sometimes there are contracts come to an end, and if that finishes poorly, then I can see youth workers feeling like, you know, the church doesn't value me. I'll go and do something else. But then also in doing the survey, I found lots of workers who, regardless of how they were being treated, were passionate about what they were doing. So they continued to look, how can we keep serving young people? This is my calling. That's not about whether a church values what I do or not. I mean, one of the things I encourage people to think about when I'm mentoring them is to determine for themselves the difference between being appointed and being anointed. So that idea of being called by God and set apart, and being appointed by human beings who are fallible, and sometimes don't get what youth ministry is about and what we're doing. And that's a hard tension to kind of get to, because we want the church to value what we're doing and what we're offering. And if it doesn't appear to, we can start to question our call and whether we're supposed to be doing it or not. But if you can push through that when that happens, then I think the potential within youth ministry and the need for it just seems to increase in the way I'm seeing what's going on in the world. So I think it's a mixed picture. Some are staying, some are going, but we've got quite a high turnover and a young workforce in terms of time spent, not necessarily age.
No, that's really helpful. And it's even in those statistics, which I admit are more encouraging than other statistics I've been through. Even in those, it does seem like there is, like you say, high turnover and a young workforce. And I guess the question I'm asking is how do we encourage those young youth workers to progress beyond those 3-5 years? How do we help them equip themselves to see this as a long-term career, a long-term venture?
I think one of the challenges is getting the balance between putting the onus on the worker and the onus on the wider church. So just because it's an area I've got experience in, just take the Church of England as an example. Going back to 2016, even earlier than that, but 2016, primarily the evangelistic task group that was focused on youth work at the time did a report to General Synod that was just about, we need to have youth specialists recognised within the church. And they even used the term, this is not a stepping stone to better ministry or whatever. So I was like, great. 4 years on, nothing. It's all very well writing it in a report, but as with lots of things, the church, the synod's quite happy to nod and agree with something that they know is true. What's different is then putting that into practice that demonstrates to people that are in youth ministry, not only do we believe that's true, we're going to create an environment where you can flourish in this ministry. And that's the bit that I think's not happened yet. It's left to individual churches to work it out. So it's hit or miss whether you get a good place that's going to encourage you and have a good environment in which to work, regardless of salary. Some people have said on my research, I'm not paid as well as I could be, but I'm loved, I'm really valued, I've got fantastic support, so I can cope with that. But in other places, people are paid well, and yet actually might be the opposite in terms of line management and supervision. So the actual support is poor. We've got to get a whole picture together of the kind of stuff that needs to be put in place. And then I think that helps youth workers think about their sense of not career progression, but the longevity of being in ministry. They can see that as being a hopeful and a positive perspective to have, because they're going to have churches that are going to create the space for them to be there.
Yeah.
As opposed to fighting to exist and then justifying your existence to your PCC or diaconate every couple of years.
Yeah. No, that's helpful, because an awful lot of youth workers I speak to who have quit or have moved on will blame the church they're from, and a lot of those churches will blame the youth worker who was there. And it does feel like no one's quite biting on what the central issues are. A lot of the churches are saying the youth worker wasn't experienced, wasn't ready, didn't build a team around themselves, didn't report properly, and the youth workers are saying, yeah, but you didn't manage me, you didn't pay me well enough. It does seem like there's a miscommunication with where the issues really lie. I'd love you if you could pick up on that a little bit. Is there something we can do to help these two parties communicate better together so we can increase the chance of these youth workers sticking around?
I think often what's focused on by church is the job description. Mm-hmm. So what is the job that we want to be done? Mm. When the most important thing is the person spec.
Yeah.
Who do we want to do it? And so it's almost like an add-on, and we kind of stick the person spec in there. We want these kind of things, this kind of stuff. But actually, for me, the person that you employ is more important than the job.
Yeah.
So if a church knows they've got a 20, 21-year-old who's just finished, or even a 19-year-old who's coming as a student youth worker who's just starting out, then you need to put more in place for them to support them as they grow.
Yeah.
If somebody's arriving at a church, they're a decade in, they're 30 years old, then you should expect more from them in terms of what they bring to the table in terms of responsibility and how they're going to choose to be accountable, and then create, it's a kind of relationship where there's reciprocal accountability and responsibility.
Yeah.
But that's a sliding scale depending upon the person.
Yeah.
And I think lots of churches don't think like that. The job description, then they look at the job description and think, well, you're not doing this. And it's like, no, I'm 19 and you've written a job description for somebody who's been in ministry for 20 years, because it's all about create a team, initiate this with this school, do this over here. Yeah. It's just not doable unless you put in place a really good supportive team that will help that person grow into the role.
Yeah.
And then that's about investing in the person. When someone's invested in for who they are, not just what they do, they're more likely to stay than for somebody for whom it is literally, have you done what we've said on the job description?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's really helpful. I like that. Investing in the person's spec, not just the job spec, is very, very clear. I'm just wondering if we can just pick up a little bit on the intergenerational side of this. If we may. So very, very briefly, people who don't know what intergen is, could you just give us a good summary paragraph? What is intergen ministry?
I guess for me, it's a holistic picture of the church involving every generation, all equal, serving God together, growing as a household of faith, a gathered community, including every age. It's not about how often you do all age worship. Mm-hmm. It's so much more than that in terms of engagement, participation. The voice of everyone matters, child or adult. And there's a genuine sense of community that is right across the generations, as opposed to compartmentalized ministry where our default is to be in age groups.
Yeah. Now, that's why I want to pick up on this. And that's a really helpful summary, because it feels like youth workers, I might not be right here, but it feels like youth workers have the most homogenous group, the most hyper-specialized ministry. It's this age to this age. Children's workers often work a little bit more broadly with families and parents. Families workers obviously have that in their remit, but often youth workers, it feels like they're expected to be hyper-specialized. And I wonder if we were able to help the youth workers think more intergenerationally, whether they would be more inclined to stick around because they will be more naturally working in a team. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I think part of the challenge is the history of youth work. If we go back and we think when Christian ministry started in terms of training, whether it's, if you go back to Oasis doing stuff, YMCA College has been training people for youth work for a long time. But when we started to invest in youth work and think of it as a profession, and we started to think youth and community work, and theology at the time when youth courses got going was an add-on. JNC was the thing we had to go after in terms of statutory recognition. And what was linked with that was, if you're a professional youth worker, then there is this separation, this boundary that's created between you, the professional, and the other spaces that young people inhabit.
Yeah.
So there's a natural thing about being a specialist in youth ministry that means you work with the young people and nobody else.
Yeah.
And I get that from the point, if you're a social worker or if you're a teacher, you don't go and hang out in the homes of the young people that you're serving. You meet parents at a parents' evening. You don't kind of know them relationally.
Yeah. Sure.
But church being community, that isn't how it is. And I think some youth workers have not adapted well. And the church hasn't grasped that we need, I would say we need youth and families workers just as we've got children's and families workers. But it's very rare that you see a job post advertised that's saying we'd like a youth and families worker.
Yeah.
And by youth, they mean whatever age a child or young person is. Children and families workers, they don't think, a child is up until the age of 18, in my mind.
Yeah.
As a parent, my children are still my children. They always will be, but in terms of them being a child,
yeah.
As far as I'm concerned, until they're 18. So, but in churches, children's ministry or children's and youth and families ministry is your children bits 0 to 11s.
Yeah.
And, for me, thinking as a youth worker as well, youth work doesn't start at 11 and it doesn't end at 18.
Yeah.
We inherit as a youth worker so much that has been developed or done with children.
Yeah.
And still I see youth workers starting again, thinking they're starting from scratch with a 12-year-old.
Yeah.
When they've had this whole history of life in the church and teaching and everything. And that's a mistake.
Yeah.
And then when we get to the end, it's like we wave goodbye. And yet there's so much richness in terms of staying in relationship and contact as they go through student life, as they go to work, have kids. It's great being in touch with young people that I've worked with years ago. So there's a guy down the road from me who's was in my youth group. And when I arrived, he really wasn't impressed that I'd arrived. We didn't get on when I first started there. But he's a head teacher now, which is bonkers to me. I would never have imagined it in a million years. With a lovely family, and he's down the road from me where I am now in Clitheroe. So it's just great being able to stay in relationship. And that, I guess the key thing is relationship. So for children's and families workers, you don't stop having relationship with those kids that you've known for 5 years in the kids group. As they hit 12, you suddenly can't work with them.
Yeah.
That to me is a nonsense, but we've created that environment in the church by separating out the generations to our detriment, I think, as the people of God.
Yeah. No, that's really helpful. It does feel like there's 3 boxes, a children's box, the youth box, and the adult box, and you have to move from one to the other. But of course, the transitional gaps is when people tend to fall out of church. The 11 transitional age and then the 18 transitional age is when people leave. And if you're asking them to jump from one box to another, it makes sense why they might do that.
Yeah.
Can we do some myth busting?
Go on.
I love this myth busting sort of idea. What I do is I give you a hypothetical statement that someone in one of these churches could say. Caveat, I'm not saying it and I don't believe it, but I'm going to say a statement and I just love your off-the-cuff response to the statement. And these are statements that probably would be in the ethos of some churches.
Yeah, go on.
Fab. Well, statement 1. Youth work is just about keeping the kids entertained so that they stay in church.
Yeah, no, it's not. I think the challenge with anything that is, I would say, focused on an attractional model is what is it we're attracting them to? Because for me as a Christian, the most attractive thing about me should be Jesus.
Yeah.
But I think the entertainment side of things is it's almost as if they won't want us for who we really are.
Yeah.
So let's put all the bells and whistles, put on an entertaining program. As long as they've had fun, we've achieved something in the evening.
Yeah.
But the reality is, in terms of, you can create a great social club for young people, and they'll come if you put on the best show in town.
Yeah.
But in terms of relationship with Jesus, which ultimately is our goal if we're part of the kingdom and we're seeking to make disciples, is that needs intentional relationships that share the good news.
Yeah.
And that can be done in an entertaining way, but the entertainment has to serve the wider goal, not be the thing for itself. And the entertainment until implies there's nothing they can do until they reach a certain point.
Yeah.
I mean, Graham Cray's classic quote is about basically, how do we keep them in church until they learn to worship properly like the rest of us? Which was from his Grove booklet about, how do we engage with young people and plant the gospel where they are, not just expect them to come to where we are.
Yeah.
And it's a bit like, Richard Passmore wrote years ago in Meet Them Where They're At, which is, sorry, Richard, but it's decades old now. But when he wrote that, it was basically about, we need to meet young people where they are.
Yeah.
And the thing with entertainment is it's a come to us model.
Yeah.
If we actually went out from the church, difficult though that might be right at the moment as we're recording this with lockdown still in place in some ways, but if we went out from the church and built relationships with young people in our community, got alongside them, found out what their needs were, sought to meet those without some massive agenda, but just to love them because it's what we should do and build relationships. That's the other challenge we talked about earlier about youth work is 3 years of doing that, you might start to see some fruit.
Yeah.
So going back to the contract thing, some of our contracts just aren't long enough because you haven't got time.
Yeah.
You're just beginning to make headway 3 years in from a place of starting with nothing.
Yeah.
Anyway, but I think in terms of the entertainment thing, it's a nonsense. Young people want authentic, meaningful relationships. That's what makes a difference.
No, really helpful. I wish someone told me that when I started 15 years ago, because I was a youth worker in London and I had a big church and a budget and a big youth group, but down the street was 3 others doing it bigger and better than I was. And so all we did was compete. And I had to make mine more attractional and more exciting and entertaining than theirs. And you always knew when they had a bad week because the next week they'd be with you and then they'd be back with them. And it was church shopping at its worst. So I wish someone told me that.
Well, somebody once said, comparison's the root of all inferiority.
That's a great quote.
So, the more we do that in ministry, the worse it gets for all of us.
Yeah.
There's always going to be somebody doing it better.
Yeah.
And so you either end up being smug because you're doing it better, and then that's your arrogance comes into play. Instead of John 3:30, he must increase, I must increase. No, he must increase, I must decrease. I got it wrong there. See what I mean? That's what can happen with comparison.
Oh, bless you.
But it's that environment that we can create in the church.
Yeah.
And that doesn't serve the kingdom. There's enough young people to reach without trying to outdo the church down the road and get theirs.
Yeah, there's enough for all of us. Absolutely. Let's try another one of these myths. Youth workers need to be pretty young because the older you get, the less relevant you are.
Yeah, that's nonsense as well. There are young adults I know who wouldn't be thought of as being relevant to young people just a couple of years younger than them because they share different interests, they're doing different stuff with their lives. It's just a different place that they're in. Again, coming back to relationships, that's what counts. In my experience, for lots of young people, the most favourite people in their world, who they will talk to about stuff they don't talk to anybody else, is their grandparents. Age is no barrier to being in ministry with young people. If anything, I think the more experience you have, the more you create a level of trust and relationship where a young person knows they can rely on you to be there. For me, that's far better than having a 19, 20, 21-year-old who may want to stay, but actually there might be something else they want to do with their lives. So somebody who's committed. And again, I think in terms of youth work, and if you're a salaried worker and you're leading a team, the most important people in the lives of the young people in your church are the volunteers, not you. Because by and large, they're still going to be there when you've left. So who are the volunteers that you're working with, investing in terms of the young people?
Yeah.
And actually your role as a youth leader should be more about equipping your team and sustaining the ministry with training and support and encouragement than how many young people can you be in relationship with.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we get that the wrong way round when we're salaried.
Yeah. Do you know, we're going to have to do another video at some point, because I'd love to spend just time on that. I think one of the biggest barriers to longevity is trying to do it all yourself.
Absolutely.
The
Yeah.
more you can equip a team around you to do it, the more your energy's managed well and the ministry is more effective.
But if I can say, I think right now, I don't know when you're putting this out to people, but right now we're in danger of returning to the lone youth worker model. Because youth workers can do this Zoom stuff, get a youth group together by themselves, because everybody's somewhere else physically in their homes with their parents or whatever. So in that sense, there's safety. But if you've got a youth worker, because they're the salaried worker thinking they have to do it, they're creating all the content to put up at church on a Sunday, they're doing the Zoom with the youth group on a Wednesday, suddenly the need for teams evaporated. We need to watch that. Youth workers, if you're watching and you're salaried, during this lockdown time, have you spoken to your volunteer youth workers? Have you engaged with them? Have you had a team meeting via Zoom? Or has it all been about delivering content for young people? And you've turned yourself into that lone youth worker that you never thought you would be.
No, really helpful. And add to that the youth workers are often the most tech savvy part of a congregation. They're often setting up all the live streams for the main services and things as well.
Yeah, the expectation is you've got to do it for the rest of the church as well.
Digital
not just
burnout.
Youth work. I know.
Absolutely. Let me give you one more myth. And this is a golden oldie. This is a classic. Youth work is just time to prep for being a real pastor. Yeah.
See, what's interesting about that is, apart from, need to be a little bit careful what I say. No, I don't really, because I don't work for anybody anymore. Not that I was particularly careful when I did, but I would say there just is the only thing that youth workers can't do, and this depends upon the theology and the doctrine of the church, is they can't do the magic with communion or baptism, depending upon what church you're in. But in every other way, they're ministers of the gospel. You know, we are pastors if we're nurturing young people. We're evangelists if we're reaching out into the community. We're teachers if we're nurturing young people in the faith. We're making disciples. There's nothing we're not doing that is not equivalent in responsibility in terms of being a shepherd, as we have church leaders who would be seen as being, that's the thing to aspire to. And also I think if you have people at the age when they're making a decision for Christ, and we know that most people make a decision for Christ before the age of 19. So if we're wanting people to serve, who do we want to be in those roles? For me, that's about having our best people serving children and young people. So why would you want to be a pastor of adults when the most exciting stuff that's happening is nurturing children and young people and seeing them grow in faith? It is discipleship on fast forward, because so much happens in such a short space of time with children and young people. I mean, I've got a 12 and a 14-year-old, and just as I think, okay, I know what I'm doing with a 12-year-old, they change, they become a 13-year-old, and then you have to start all over again. It feels like that as a parent. You know, but so much more if you're working with a crowd of young people and they're all in a different place with God. It's just so exciting. So I can't imagine pastoring a bunch of people that generally on a Sunday morning sit and look at you if you're in church. And you could be preaching a blinder and they don't bat an eyelid. You could be killing them and they don't bat an eyelid. I'd much rather do youth work. Where if you're rubbish, they tell you. Where if you're preaching a blinder, they might kind of, you know, vaguely look like something's going on. But even then, sometimes it's just a different environment working with young people. I love it. So for me, that's a nonsense. I think the challenge with the church is our ecclesiology shapes leadership around a certain dynamic in terms of how we're led. I think what isn't there when people go to ordination college, many from youth work, is there isn't a mutual learning that takes place. I'd love it if colleges that train people for ordination, the first thing they did when youth workers got there was, what can we learn from you that we should embed into our practice in this college that means we're equipping people better?
Yeah.
Because youth workers often come with being more collaborative, better, in my experience, of building and growing teams than lots of church leaders I know.
Yeah.
There's just so much that could be learnt that would enrich the whole church if we had better value placed on what youth workers and children's and families workers are doing.
Yeah. No, it's really, really helpful. I hope what people picked up on there is how many times Ali said the word nurture.
Nurture, mate, nurture.
Yeah, nurture through relationship. I love it. It's very, very helpful. And you know, I spent a lot of my time studying pioneering mission, and a lot of this new, fresh expressions, church planting, missionary theory is based on stuff we were doing as youth workers 20 years ago. And so we've got to talk more. We've got to play catch up. And again, like Ali said before, the intergen approach, I think, is a brilliant way of doing that. Ali, final thoughts? Anything that I just haven't given you the room to say and you'd love to throw in here?
I guess one of the challenges is to, in terms of thinking about being in it for the long haul and continuing to do it, is what has God put on your heart to do? I think that's the key thing to ask the question. What is it that God has put on your heart to do that you know in your knower, as Mike actually used to say, is the stuff that just is there that really resonates with you, that you are energized by doing. And I kind of think, do that. So if the church employs you to do it, great. If the church doesn't employ you to do it anyway. I think if your call is to serve young people and reach the next generation, and that is your passion and your heart, then do it. And I think the more of us that just press into that, my hope would be the church perspective that sometimes can inhibit people flourishing in ministry for the long haul because there's expectations around what you will grow into or what is next.
Yeah.
I would hope those would disappear and we wouldn't even need to have this conversation.
Yeah, that'd be fantastic. Ali, how can people connect with you? Where's the best places I can send people?
I've got a Facebook page which people can engage with if they're still hanging out on Facebook. Ali the Resource is that, and then my website, theresource.org.uk, and people can drop me an email, and the email's at the top of the website and the bottom as well. And I'm happy to chat about ministry and engage with people. I can do virtual training if people want that during this time. Happy to come physically and hang out with people if that helps. And I guess one of the key things that I would say the resource exists to do is to add value to what others are doing. So if I can work with anyone to support them in what they're doing, add value to what they're already doing, not tell people how to do stuff differently, but just bring a perspective that helps them grow in what they're already doing and how God's shaping and calling them, then great.
Yeah. No, really helpful. And I'm going to recommend to people, particularly when we eventually move out of lockdown, the paradigm's going to change. How do we move out from this into a new era of youth work? Get in touch with Ali and have a conversation, because it's going to need some wisdom on how we navigate the next steps as well. And it's a perfect time to use that kind of consultancy. So churches, youth workers, get on that. Ali, this has been incredibly helpful. I have no idea how I'm going to edit this down to 30 minutes because this is gold, but really, really grateful.
Well, yeah. Do what you like, mate. Cut me out.
No, very, very helpful. Ali, thank you very, very much.
All right, mate. Take care.